Hi, I'm Simone, and my husband just humiliated me by coldly cutting up the only credit card he allowed me to use, screaming that I needed to learn to live without his money. What he didn't know was that all that money, every single cent, was always mine. Have you ever been made to feel worthless using something that actually belongs to you? Before I tell you what happened right after I picked the pieces of that card off the floor, one by one, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. Trust me, you won't want to miss the look on his face when he tried to use his money the next day and discovered the truth in the worst way possible. We lived in a luxurious 50th floor penthouse in Brickell, overlooking the ocean, views that looked ripped straight out of an architecture magazine. To the world, we were the perfect couple. Darius Vance, the charismatic, successful 28-year-old entrepreneur, and me, his devoted and silent 26-year-old wife, Simone Jenkins. He was the sun around which our social universe revolved, and I was barely an invisible satellite. All his friends, his partners, even my own family had bought the narrative he sold so carefully, that he was the financial genius, the self-made man who had given us this dream life. The truth, however, was much simpler and far more cruel. Darius had never earned a dollar on his own. Our entire fortune came from my investments, a portfolio I built with intelligence and patience years before I even met him. The humiliation wasn't an isolated event. It was the air I breathed every day. It manifested in small, cruel gestures, like the allowance he assigned me on a secondary credit card in his name. It was a symbolic leash, a constant reminder of my supposed dependence. "Be careful what you spend, my love," he used to tell me with a condescending smile while polishing his Rolex watch, a gift he'd bought for himself with my money to celebrate a successful deal. Every time he boasted about the new Mercedes AMG in the garage or talked about his company, a part of me shrank. I, a programmer who had been one of the first investors in a tech startup that took off, had become a simple administrator of my own gilded cage. I remember perfectly how it all started. Early in our relationship, his interest in my finances seemed like a gesture of love and protection. "Let me handle everything so you don't stress yourself out," he told me one night with that smooth, persuasive voice he knew how to use so well. Head over heels in love, and tired of the pressure of managing a considerable fortune, I agreed. I thought I was building a partnership, a team. Slowly, without me even realizing it, he transferred control, putting the accounts in his name as the administrator, giving me limited access, and rewriting the narrative of our lives until my own story was completely erased. He became the protagonist of a success story I had written and financed. Our apartment, which once felt like a home, transformed into a museum of his ego. Every piece of contemporary art on the walls, every piece of Italian designer furniture were trophies he displayed as proof of his brilliance. I often saw him pacing the living room with a glass of wine in hand, admiring his achievements. I'd sit on the sofa, feeling like just another decorative object, functional but voiceless. The sound of his Rolex's second hand was sometimes the only thing that broke the silence between us, a constant reminder of the time I was losing, of the power I had willingly surrendered in the name of a love that turned out to be an elaborate emotional scam. The loneliness was suffocating, especially at social gatherings. Darius's friends, all businessmen and women in expensive suits and sharp smiles, treated me with condescending kindness. They'd ask me about my hobbies, my gym routine, or the latest luxury store I'd visited. They never asked about my work, my ideas on the tech market, or the investment strategies that, ironically, were financing their dinners and weekend trips. To them, I was simply Darius's wife, a pretty, quiet accessory. I tried a couple of times to participate in their conversations, to offer my perspective, but Darius always found a way to interrupt me or trivialize my comment with a joke, putting me back in my place. That night, the tension in the air was palpable. We had a crucial dinner with potential investors for his new venture, a project entirely financed by my trust fund, of course. Darius had spent hours rehearsing his speech in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie, practicing his million-dollar smile. "Tonight is everything, Simone. "If we close this deal, we can finally expand as I've planned," he told me without looking away from his reflection. I watched him from the bed, seeing a man who had fallen in love with his own lie. The irony was so bitter it almost choked me. He was asking others for money, using my money as collateral to build an empire on sand. An unusual coldness settled in my chest as I watched him prepare. I no longer felt pain or rage, only a strange, distant clarity. It was as if I were watching a movie, observing a character who no longer generated any emotion in me. For years, I had justified his behavior. I had told myself that his need for control was a strange form of love, that his ego was fragile and needed protection. But that night, all the excuses vanished. I saw him for what he really was, a charismatic parasite, a man terrified of his own mediocrity who had found in me the perfect host for his fantasy of grandeur. The woman I was before him, the brilliant, bold young woman, seemed like a distant ghost. We headed toward the door to leave for the restaurant. He walked ahead with the confidence of a king in his castle. I paused for a moment in front of the large hall mirror. For an instant, under the spotlight, I didn't see the submissive, dull wife. I saw a flash of the old Simone, the one who negotiated with venture capitalists and trusted her instincts, the woman who had built all of this. Darius turned, impatient. "Are you coming or not? We can't be late. My future depends on this." I mentally corrected his sentence. Our future, I thought. Although he didn't know it, I knew something was going to break that night. What I didn't imagine was that it wouldn't be me. The drive in the Mercedes AMG to the restaurant in South Beach was an exercise in contained tension. Darius drove with one hand on the wheel, the other impatiently drumming on his thigh. His knuckles were white. He rehearsed the key points of his presentation aloud, rehearsed phrases that sounded grandiloquent and hollow in the confined space of the luxurious car. "The key is to project confidence. They need to see that capital isn't an issue," he muttered more to himself than to me. I watched the city lights blur through the window, feeling the cold leather of the seat against my skin. I didn't answer. My silence seemed to irritate him even more, but I no longer had the words to feed his fantasy. I was saving my energy. I would need it. We arrived at the Capitol Grill, a place where status was served as the main course. The valet rushed to open Darius's door, treating him with the reverence reserved for men who, like him, wore success like a tailor-made suit. As soon as he stepped onto the sidewalk, his anxiety evaporated, replaced by a mask of charisma and power. He took my arm, not with tenderness, but with a gesture of possession, guiding me through the bustle of the restaurant. The tables were filled with loud, affluent people. The air smelled of money and expensive perfume. For him, this was his natural habitat. For me, it felt like a gladiatorial arena where I was the only one unarmed. We were led to a private booth in the back, where two middle-aged people in equally expensive suits were waiting for us. The investors, Mr. Holloway and Ms. Nguyen, rose to greet us. They shook Darius's hand firmly, exchanging jokes about the market and golf. When I was introduced, their smiles became polite, but distant. "Pleased to meet the beautiful woman behind the genius," Mr. Holloway said, and I returned a smile that didn't reach my eyes. For the first 20 minutes, the conversation flowed around me, but never through me. They asked how the wine was, if I liked the decor, but never what I thought of the monetization strategy for the new platform. I was the trophy wife, sitting in silence, nodding at the right moments, another piece of the decor Darius had assembled for his big night. Then, Darius began his pitch. He spoke with contagious passion about his vision, about how he had identified a gap in the fintech market, and how his seed capital would allow him to scale quickly. He detailed the platform's algorithm, using technical terms he had memorized from the reports I had written for him. I listened with a glass of water in my hand, feeling every word of his erase a little more of my existence. He was a story thief, a ventriloquist using my voice to build his own legend. No one at that table except me knew that the genius he was describing was a woman sitting beside him, treated like a child. That's when it happened. When describing the database architecture, Darius mixed up a key term. He said SHA-1 hashing procedure when talking about user data encryption, a protocol known to be vulnerable and unused for years. It was a small mistake, but for anyone in the tech sector, it was a red flag. Without thinking, almost as a reflex from my old life, I intervened. We actually use SHA-256 with a per-user cryptographic salt, I said in a low, clear voice. SHA-1 wouldn't be secure. My words hung in the air, breaking the spell of his monologue. The silence that followed lasted barely 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Miss Nguyen's eyes, which until then had been fixed on Darius with admiration, turned toward me with a new spark of interest. Mr. Holloway raised an eyebrow. For an instant, the power dynamic at the table inverted. I saw panic cross Darius's face, a micro-expression of fury and humiliation before his mask of charm snapped back into place. The invisible satellite had just proven it had its own light, and the sun didn't know how to react. It was a moment of validation so intense and terrifying that it left me breathless. Darius recovered with a forced, overly loud laugh. He put an arm around my shoulders, squeezing with a strength that was almost painful. "There she is, my secret weapon," he told the investors. "Simone is my personal quality control. She loves to keep me on my toes with technical details. She's such a tech hobbyist." He reduced my knowledge, my career, my identity to a simple hobby. He demoted me from expert to enthusiast in a single sentence, and he did it with a smile. The investors laughed. The tension dissipated for them, but for me, the squeeze on my shoulder was a clear warning. The conversation continued, but something had broken. The rest of the dinner was torture. Darius tried twice as hard to be charismatic, telling anecdotes and promising astronomical returns. I remained silent, but my silence was no longer submissive. It was a heavy silence, loaded with meaning. I felt Miss Nguyen's occasional glances, no longer condescending, but curious, evaluating. The deal Darius had considered closed now seemed uncertain. He knew it. I could feel his rage bubbling beneath the surface, a beast waiting for the apartment doors to close to be unleashed. I paid the bill with one of his credit cards. The irony was not lost on me. The drive back home was sepulchral. Darius drove with both hands gripping the wheel, his knuckles completely white. He didn't say a word. The only sound was the engine's hum and the ticking of his Rolex, which seemed to count the seconds until the inevitable explosion. I looked at his profile, jaw clenched, neck muscles tense. I no longer saw the man I had fallen in love with. I saw a stranger, an actor, whose part had been interrupted. The fear I usually felt in these situations had been replaced by a chilling resignation. I knew what was coming, and for the first time, I wasn't scared. I was ready. As soon as the door to our apartment closed behind us, the storm erupted. "What in the hell do you think you were doing?" he screamed, his voice echoing off the marble in the foyer. "You humiliated me. You made me look like an idiot in front of them. I spent the whole night working to close that deal, the deal that's going to secure our future, and you ruined it with your stupid need to be the smartest person in the room." He approached me, his face contorted with rage. I didn't back down. I stood still, looking him directly in the eyes, which seemed to infuriate him even more. My calm was fuel for his fire. His anger reached a boiling point. "You are so disconnected from reality. You have no idea what it takes to earn the money you spend so happily," he spat. With a brusque movement, he snatched the purse from my hand, emptying its contents onto the entrance table. My keys, phone, and wallet fell with a dry clatter. He opened the wallet, pulled out the only credit card he allowed me to use, the secondary card in his name, and walked over to the desk. He opened a drawer and took out a pair of office scissors. "Looks like you need a lesson in the value of money," he said, his voice trembling with icy fury. "My money." And then, with 2 dry, violent snaps, he cut the card into 4 pieces. The pieces of plastic fell onto the pristine silk rug with an almost inaudible sound. But to me, it was like the crash of a building collapsing. Darius stood with his chest heaving and the scissors still in his hand, looking at me with an expression of savage triumph. He expected tears, expected pleas. He expected me to collapse and beg for forgiveness for having challenged him, for having dared to have a voice. But the only thing he found was my silence, a silence so deep and dense that it seemed to absorb all the oxygen from the room. I looked him straight in the eyes, and for the first time in years, I didn't see the man I loved, but a scared jailer who had just used his last weapon, unaware that the prison walls had always been mine. He misinterpreted my calm as shock, as the beginning of surrender. "Let's see what you do now," his voice continued, dripping with contempt. "Let's see how you pay for lunch with your friends or your yoga classes. You're going to learn the hard way that everything in this house, every luxury you enjoy, I earned with the sweat of my brow." He gestured broadly, encompassing the apartment, the bay views, the art on the walls. Every word was a lie, another layer of paint over the truth I had allowed to be buried. I didn't say anything. I simply let his monologue run its course, let his poison fill the air until nothing was left but a hollow echo of his own insecurity. His fury fed on my reaction, and by giving him none, he began to deflate, disconcerted. Then slowly, I bent my knees and crouched down. My movements were deliberate, fluid, without a hint of tremor. With my fingertips, I picked up the first piece of the card. The half-shattered bank logo stared back at me. Then the second, with my mutilated name, Simo. The third, with the last digits, and finally the fourth. Darius watched me from above, an imposing shadow whose confusion was transforming into renewed irritation. "What are you doing? Are you going to tape them back together?" he mocked, but his voice lacked its former conviction. My behavior didn't fit his script. A humiliated woman should cry, not act with the precision of someone picking up the pieces of a puzzle she finally understood. I stood up with the 4 pieces of plastic resting in the palm of my hand. They weighed nothing, but for me, they held the weight of years of condescension, erasure, and forced silences. I looked him directly in the eyes, feeling an icy, unfamiliar strength rise up my spine. "You're right," I told him, and my voice sounded strange, serene, as if it belonged to someone else, to the woman I was before him. "I need to learn how to do that." He let out a short, bitter laugh, a sound of relief. He had won, or so he thought. He turned around, leaving the scissors on the table like an abandoned weapon on the battlefield, and headed to the kitchen to pour himself a whiskey. For him, the show was over. For me, it had just begun. I walked toward our bedroom with my fist closed around the fragments of my old life. I closed the door behind me, a soft gesture that felt like a definitive slam. The sound of Darius opening the bottle and the ice clinking in the glass was a distant noise from another world. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dim light and opened my hand. There they were, the symbols of my supposed dependence, but I no longer saw them that way. They were the broken keys to my cage. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, the screen illuminating my face with a cold light. For years it had been a device for receiving his orders and managing our social calendar. Tonight, it would become my only weapon. I remembered an almost forgotten conversation with Mr. Sterling, my family's wealth manager since I was a teenager. Months after my wedding, when I instructed him to add Darius as an authorized user on my main accounts, I noticed a hesitation in his voice. "Simone," he had said with his usual professional tact, "it's always prudent to maintain a clear chain of command. Perhaps we should establish a safety protocol that only you can activate." In my lovesick blindness, I laughed and told him not to worry, that Darius and I were a team. "Of course," he replied, "but permit me to create a file labeled Protocol 0, just in case you ever change your mind." That previously irrelevant memory was now a lighthouse in the darkness. From the living room, Darius's voice boomed with renewed arrogance. "Hey, I'm calling my boy, Mark, to finalize the weekend in the Keys. You're going to stay here and think carefully about how you're going to apologize to me if you want your privileges back." The word privileges hit me with the force of a slap. Privileges. He was talking about my own money as if it were crumbs he was tossing me from his imaginary throne. The casualness with which he planned his luxurious escape, financed by me, while sentencing me to house arrest, was the final catalyst. The last molecule of doubt, the last vestige of the woman who had loved him, dissolved. I opened my laptop, the device he always called my little toy to pass the time. My fingers, which hadn't programmed anything serious in years, moved across the keyboard with surprising muscle memory. I accessed my private banking portal, the section he didn't even know existed, where the core of my fortune resided, untouched and under my exclusive control. The charts, the numbers, the performance reports, everything was there. It was like looking at my own reflection after a long time and recognizing myself. I saw years of growth, intelligent decisions, and patience. I saw the woman who had built all this, and I knew exactly what I had to do. I drafted an email, short, cold, and unambiguous. The recipient's address was Mr. Sterling's. The subject was simple: Protocol 0, immediate execution. In the body of the message, I wrote 3 clear sentences. Please proceed with the execution of Protocol 0 with immediate effect. Revoke all secondary user access on all accounts associated with my name. Transfer all balances to contingency account 77B. Confirm when done. My finger paused over the send button. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. It was the abyss, the point of no return. In that instant of hesitation, I heard him laughing loudly in the living room. He was on the phone with one of his friends. "You won't believe it. Simone tried to correct me in the middle of dinner in front of Holloway and Gwen. Obviously, I had to put her in her place when we got home. You know how they are. You have to remind them who wears the pants every once in a while." The contempt in his voice, the ease with which he turned me into the punchline of his story, was the push I needed. The image of the submissive wife shattered. With a slow, deep exhale, I clicked. The soft sound of the trackpad, minute, almost imperceptible, but to me, it resonated like the starting gun of a new life. The silent war was over, and I had won it without raising my voice. I closed the laptop with ceremonial slowness, its screen darkening like a curtain falling at the end of a painfully long play. From the living room, Darius's laugh still floated in the air, mixing with the clinking of ice in his glass. He was so immersed in his world of self-deception, so sure of his power, that he had no idea the ground beneath his feet had just disintegrated. I stayed seated in the darkness of the room, listening to the beating of my own heart, which for the first time in years sounded not like fear, but like a silent, steady war drum. The decision was made, the order was given. Now, all that remained was to wait for the real world to catch up with the new truth I had just created. The waiting was the strangest part. Every minute stretched like an eternity. I could hear him moving through the apartment, his voice still on the phone, boasting about how he had put me in my place. His every word, instead of hurting me, now confirmed the justice of my action. It was as if he were proving me right over and over again. I held my phone in my hand, the screen dark. I wasn't waiting for a call, but for an email, a simple confirmation message that would seal the fate of the farce we had called a marriage. I didn't feel panic or anxiety, but a chilling calm, an absolute certainty I had never experienced before. It was the calm of someone who has hit rock bottom and realizes the only possible direction is up. I felt like a strategist in her headquarters, observing the map of the battlefield, having already moved the piece that guaranteed victory. Then, the phone vibrated softly in my hand. It wasn't a sound, just a silent shake that ran up my arm. The screen lit up with a new email notification. The sender was Mr. Sterling. The subject read, Protocol 0, immediate execution. I held my breath as I opened the message. The text was brief, professional, and devastatingly effective. Dear Simone, I confirm the execution of Protocol 0. All secondary accesses have been revoked and funds consolidated in the contingency account. We are at your disposal for the next steps. Sincerely, I read the words 2, 3 times. A wave of relief so immense washed over me that I had to brace myself on the bed not to fall. It was done. It was real. I was free. The power I had willingly ceded, piece by piece, had just been reclaimed in a single digital instant. With the confirmation in my possession, a new energy flooded me. I was no longer a prisoner awaiting sentence. I was a woman with a plan. I got up, and moving silently so as not to alert Darius, I opened the closet. I didn't take a large suitcase. I wasn't going to make a scene. I took a small carry-on bag, the one I used for weekend trips before I met him. I began packing, not with the haste of a fugitive, but with the precision of someone moving out. Just the essentials. A pair of jeans, a few shirts, my laptop, my personal documents. I left behind the designer dresses, the expensive shoes, all the paraphernalia of the life he thought he had given me. Each garment I folded and stored was a tie cut with my past, one more step toward the woman I had forgotten I was. I paused in front of my jewelry box, a lacquered wood box he had given me on our first anniversary. I opened it. Inside, diamond necklaces, gold bracelets, and sapphire earrings sparkled under the faint light. They were gifts he had bought with my money to adorn his trophy wife. I looked at them without feeling anything. They were beautiful, but empty, like our life together. I reached in and searched the bottom until I found a simple pair of pearl earrings my grandmother had given me when I graduated college. They were the only things in that box that truly belonged to me. I put them on. Then I saw the 4 pieces of the credit card on the nightstand. I picked them up and put them in a small, zippered pocket of my purse, not as a reminder of the pain, but as the trophy of my silent victory. That night, for the first time, I locked our bedroom door. Darius, probably already halfway drunk, banged on the door an hour later. "Still mad, princess? Open up." His voice slurred. I didn't answer. I waited, holding my breath. "Fine, whatever," he muttered from the other side. "Sleep on the couch if you want. I don't care. We'll talk about your attitude tomorrow." I heard his footsteps move away, and then the sound of the TV in the living room. I got into bed under the Egyptian cotton sheets and felt completely alone in that enormous house, but not in a sad way. It was a powerful solitude, the solitude of self-sufficiency. I didn't sleep much that night, but it wasn't due to nerves. I was too busy planning the first day of the rest of my life. The sunrise painted the sky over Biscayne Bay pink and orange. The view from our 50th floor window, which had so often made me feel trapped, today looked like a promise. A whole world was waiting out there. I got up before the sun was fully out. Darius was snoring on the living room sofa with an empty whiskey bottle on the side table. The image was pathetic, but I didn't feel pity, only a deep and definitive detachment. I dressed in the clothes I had prepared, put on my sneakers, and grabbed my small suitcase. I was ready. The moment of confrontation, the dramatic scene he undoubtedly expected, would never come. My revenge wouldn't be a scream, but a deafening silence, a total absence. I took one last walk through the apartment, like a ghost visiting her former life. I touched the cold marble surface of the kitchen. I looked at the artwork I had chosen and he had claimed credit for. I saw his gold Rolex on the nightstand next to his charging phone. They were just objects, symbols of a wealth he had never understood or deserved. I felt no nostalgia or sadness. It was like walking through a museum dedicated to a person who no longer existed. Every corner of that place was imbued with his ego, his lies, and I was about to purify myself of all of it. The air felt lighter, more breathable. My gilded cage was about to lose its songbird. On the kitchen island, next to the keys to his prized Mercedes AMG, I left a note. I wrote it on one of the hotel note cards we kept in a drawer. There were no reproaches, no accusations, no long farewell speech. My action would speak louder than any words. The note contained only one sentence, a compass for the new world I was about to abandon him to. I hope you learn to stand on your own 2 feet. I already have. I left the apartment keys beside it. I didn't need them anymore. Everything in that house was legally mine, but in that moment, all I wanted was my freedom. I could deal with the assets and properties later through lawyers. What I needed now was to disappear from his life. I grabbed my purse and my suitcase and walked toward the front door. My steps made no sound on the Persian rug. I carefully turned the knob. I opened the door and stepped out into the silent hallway of the building. As I closed the door behind me, the sound of the deadbolt clicking into place was the most satisfying final punctuation I had ever heard. I didn't look back. I walked toward the elevator, pressed the lobby button, and as the metal doors closed, reflecting my image for an instant, I saw a woman I didn't fully recognize, but whom I liked, a woman with clear eyes and steel determination. The stage was set. Darius would wake up in his castle, believing himself to be the king, unaware that his kingdom no longer existed and that he was about to be evicted in the most humiliating way possible. I settled into a boutique hotel in Coconut Grove, a discreet place with a small balcony overlooking a lush garden. The humid Miami air felt different here, cleaner, less loaded with lies. I didn't feel the need to check my phone every 5 minutes. I knew the shockwave of my decision would take a few hours to reach Darius. I imagined him waking up late, his head heavy from the whiskey, finding the empty bed and the note next to his Mercedes keys. He would probably laugh, thinking it was a dramatic tantrum, a negotiation tactic on my part. He would believe I was at a friend's house, waiting for his apology call to return home and resume my role. Arrogance was his blindness, and I had counted on it. To him, my departure wasn't an ending, but a simple fit that would be resolved with a condescending gesture. He was about to discover how wrong he was. I was told afterward, through an indirect source, how the events unfolded that morning. Darius, just as I had predicted, woke up confused and annoyed. He saw the note, crumpled it in his fist, and threw it in the trash. "She'll get over it," he muttered to himself. There was no panic in him, only irritation. He showered, put on one of his most expensive linen shirts, and donned his Rolex, the daily ritual to build his character as a successful man. He decided to proceed with his plans for the weekend in the Keys with his friends as if nothing had happened. It was his way of punishing me, of showing me that my absence was insignificant. He told himself that when he returned Sunday night, I would already be home, repentant and submissive, ready to apologize. The idea that I could have a plan, a will of my own beyond reacting to his, was something his mind simply couldn't conceive. He got into the Mercedes AMG, the engine roaring with a power he believed belonged to him by right. He drove to an upscale grocer in Coral Gables, one of those places where people don't look at prices. His plan was to buy the best cuts of meat, expensive wines, and artisanal cheeses to impress his friends. It was part of his performance, the generous host, the man whose success translated into overflowing generosity. As he walked through the aisles, filling the cart with luxury products, he felt like the king of his universe. Every item he added was a reaffirmation of his status, a tangible proof of the life he had supposedly built. He had no idea he was living his last minutes as the man he thought he was, buying a feast for a future that no longer existed. The cart was full to the brim, a mountain of opulence that amounted to several $100s. He approached the checkout line with his characteristic confident smile, greeting the cashier by name. He was a regular customer. People knew him there. He put the items on the conveyor belt while talking on his cell phone with one of his friends, confirming the arrival time at the beach house. "Yeah, I'm bringing everything, the best of the best, as always," he boasted. When the cashier announced the total, he took out his crocodile leather wallet, extracted his gleaming black credit card, and slid it with a casual gesture. He waited for the approval beep, but instead the small terminal screen flashed 2 words in red: "Transaction declined." Darius's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Run it again. Must be a machine error," he told the cashier, his tone a little sharper. She complied. "Declined," the screen repeated. People in the line behind him began to grow impatient. He could feel their stares. The humiliation, the same one he had inflicted on me the night before, began to prick his skin. He pulled out another card, an American Express Platinum. "Try this one." The result was the same. Panic began to seep through the cracks of his composure. His face, normally tanned and confident, paled slightly. "There must be a problem with the bank system," he muttered, more to himself than to others, as he stepped away from the register, leaving behind the cart full of his false status. Furious and ashamed, he dialed the number for the private banking line, the one that always answered instantly. "This is Darius Vance," he snapped when the advisor answered. "There's a problem with my cards. They're being rejected. I need you to fix it right now." There was a pause on the other side of the line, the sound of a keyboard. The advisor's voice returned, but their tone had changed. It was cold, formal, devoid of the usual deference. "One moment, Mr. Vance. I am reviewing your profile." Darius expected an apology, an explanation about a technical fault. What he received was the sound of his world collapsing through the earpiece. The advisor's voice was like that of an executioner reading a sentence. "Mr. Vance," the advisor began with cutting precision, "I see a notification here. Effective as of last night, your status as an authorized user on all accounts associated with this portfolio has been revoked." Darius gasped. "What? That's impossible. Those accounts are mine." I could imagine the nervous, incredulous laugh he must have let out. The advisor continued, unflappable. "I'm afraid you are mistaken, sir. The sole owner and principal beneficiary of the investment fund, checking accounts, and all associated lines of credit is Ms. Simone Jenkins. Per her direct instructions, all secondary accesses have been eliminated, and the joint account you shared has been dissolved. The funds have been transferred to a contingency account to which only she has access." The silence that followed must have been absolute. I could visualize it perfectly. Darius, standing next to the wine section, the phone glued to his ear, his face transforming from disbelief to panic, and finally to pure, naked terror. "The business, the cars, the apartment." His voice, barely a whisper, stammered. "Sir," the advisor said with chilling finality, "according to our records, you do not own any assets in your name through our institution. Is there anything else I can help you with?" The question was a cruel formality. There was nothing more to say. The self-made man was a fiction. The financial genius was a fraud. The king was naked in the middle of a grocery store, and everyone could see him. He hung up the phone without saying goodbye. He stood motionless for a moment, people passing him with their full carts, a world that had suddenly become alien and hostile. He had to abandon his purchase, walking with his head down, feeling the weight of hundreds of gazes, real or imagined. He walked out into the bright Florida sun, which suddenly seemed too raw, too revealing. The Mercedes AMG, parked in the front row, was no longer a symbol of power. It was a gleaming metal cage that would soon be taken from him. He sat in the driver's seat, the same one where he had lectured me about the value of money the night before, and realized the crushing truth. He had never had money. He had only had access to mine. While all this was happening, I was sitting in a small cafe miles away. I had just bought a coffee and a croissant with a new debit card linked to my contingency account, a card with my name and only my name. I didn't feel a surge of triumph or vengeful joy. What I felt was a deep, overwhelming calm. It was the calm of justice, the serenity of having reclaimed what was mine, not just the money, but my name, my story, my power. The humiliation he had inflicted on me with scissors had been noisy, violent, and temporary. My response had been silent, digital, and absolute. I didn't need to scream to be heard. I only needed to remember who I was. In my purse, I felt the small bulge of the 4 pieces of plastic. I took them out and placed them on the table next to my coffee cup. They were no longer fragments of a humiliation. They were the pieces of a puzzle I had finally solved. They were the testimony to the last lesson Darius had unintentionally taught me, how to live without his money. And the answer was simple. I lived wonderfully well, because it had never, for a single second, been his. They were the trophy of the most silent battle I had ever fought and the most resounding victory I had ever felt. The waitress came over to clear my empty cup and saw the pieces. "That's strange," she said. "Looks like someone broke your card." I smiled, a genuine smile for the first time in years. "On the contrary," I replied, "I think someone just fixed it." From that table in the cafe, with the plastic pieces as silent witnesses to my rebirth, my first move wasn't to celebrate, but to act. I called my family's attorney, a formidable woman named Esme Washington, whose firm, calm voice was the first anchor in my new reality. I explained the situation with a composure that surprised even myself. No tears, no drama, simply laying out the facts, the financial manipulation, the humiliation, the decision to revoke all access. She listened without interruption, and when I finished, her response was as precise as a scalpel. "Excellent, Simone. I'll send you the documents to initiate the divorce this afternoon. Don't worry about the apartment or the assets. The ownership structure we established years ago is a fortress. He has absolutely no legal claim, none whatsoever." Hanging up the phone felt like signing my own Declaration of Independence. Darius's fall was as swift as it was brutal, and much more public than I had anticipated. The first visible blow was the Mercedes AMG. Since the lease was in my name and linked to my accounts, the lack of payment was immediate. 2 days after his humiliation at the grocery store, a tow truck showed up in front of the Brickell building and took the car. The doorman told me, calling to inform me with a tone of discreet solidarity. Then came the Rolex. Without access to funds, he was forced to sell it at one of those second-hand luxury shops for a fraction of its value to have some cash. The symbol of his success, his power, became the price of a few weeks of survival. Every piece of his armor of status was ripped from him one by one, exposing the vulnerable, mediocre man he had always been. His initial reaction was not one of repentance, but of narcissistic fury. My phone became a digital battlefield. I received an avalanche of text messages and voicemails, ranging from veiled threats about ruining me to manipulative pleas about our love and everything we had built together. "You're destroying me, Simone, after everything I've done for you," he yelled in one voicemail. His voice was broken not by pain, but by the rage of having lost control. I didn't respond to any of them. I created a filter that sent all his communications directly to a folder for my attorney. Silencing him was my final act of power. His voice, which had once dictated every aspect of my life, was now just white noise, an impotent echo in a digital file I no longer needed to open. I moved to an apartment in Key Biscayne, a place I bought with cash within 2 weeks. It wasn't an ostentatious penthouse, but a bright, minimalist space with a balcony overlooking a mangrove reserve. The air smelled of salt and damp earth, not expensive perfume and recycled air conditioning. I furnished the place slowly with pieces I truly liked, not designer objects chosen to impress others. I bought books, plants, and a real espresso machine. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a home, not a stage set. Every morning, I sat on the balcony with my coffee, listening to the birds sing instead of the ticking of his Rolex, and I felt a peace no amount of money could buy. I was building a life to my measure, not to the measure of someone else's expectations. The divorce process was, as Esme had predicted, clinical and unilateral. Darius hired a lawyer who initially tried to argue that he was entitled to half of the marital assets. It was a short, bloody battle for him. Esme presented documents proving that 99% of our fortune was pre-existing to our marriage, the product of my personal investments, and managed through a bulletproof trust. The apartment, the cars, the bank accounts, everything was legally mine. Darius's lawyer, seeing the mountain of evidence, advised him to accept the settlement we offered. Nothing. I didn't ask him for anything, not even to pay his own lawyer's fees. I simply wanted him gone from my life. He signed the papers in silence, defeated. The great entrepreneur was nothing more than a long-term tenant whose lease had expired. The news of our separation and the true nature of our finances spread like wildfire through our old social circle. Darius's friends, those who benefited from his supposed generosity, vanished. No more dinners at luxury restaurants, no more weekends in the Keys, no more access to the power they thought he wielded. Darius was no longer useful to them. He was forced to move out of the Brickell apartment, whose keys were returned to me by the building manager. I heard he went to live in a small, rented studio in Doral, a world away from the glamour he had considered his birthright. The facade he had so carefully built collapsed, revealing the rotten foundation it rested on. His punishment wasn't poverty, but irrelevance. The last time I heard from him directly was via an email that slipped through the filter. It wasn't furious or threatening, it was strangely pathetic. It simply read, "I don't understand how you could do this to me. I gave you everything." That sentence struck me, not with pain, but with a final clarity. He truly believed his own lie. In his mind, the charisma he projected, the social life he orchestrated, were contributions so valuable they equaled the fortune I had created. He had never seen my money as ours, but as fuel for his own show. And he had never seen me as his partner, but as his silent sponsor. I deleted the email and felt the last thread connecting me to him break forever. There was nothing to understand. We had simply lived in two different realities. Weeks later, while unpacking one of the last boxes, I found a small envelope. Inside were the 4 pieces of the credit card. I placed them on the palm of my hand and looked at them under the sunlight streaming through the window of my new home. I no longer saw the humiliation or the rage of that night in them. I saw the catalyst. I saw the exact moment the woman I had been was forced to die so the woman I was meant to be could be born. I didn't throw them away. I went to my desk and put them in a small wooden box, not as a trophy of vengeance, but as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes, to rebuild yourself completely, you first have to let yourself be broken into pieces. It was the most powerful amulet I possessed. Today, my life is quiet, and it is mine. I went back to work, not out of necessity, but out of passion. I joined a small tech startup as a partner, where my ideas are heard and my experiences valued. On weekends, instead of going to loud parties, I kayak through the mangroves or read on my balcony. I haven't seen Darius again, and his name is rarely mentioned. He is like a character in a book I read a long time ago. I don't feel hatred for him, or even pity. I feel a deep gratitude for the lesson he forced me to learn. My value was never on a credit card, a luxury apartment, or in the approval of others. It was always inside me, waiting silently for me to have the courage to reclaim it. And now that I have, I don't plan on letting go again. I look at the 4 pieces of that credit card, which I now keep in a small wooden box on my desk, and I understand something fundamental. Sometimes, life doesn't break you to destroy you, but to shatter the version of you that no longer serves you. That humiliation, that act of symbolic violence, was not the end of my story. It was the violent Big Bang that created a new universe, one in which I was the center. It was the only way to force me to pick up my own pieces and realize that by putting them back together, I could build something much stronger, something no one could ever cut again. Each fragment is a reminder that my value was not printed on a piece of plastic, but forged in the silence of my own resilience, waiting for the right moment to manifest. What I learned on that marble floor on my knees was not about money or power. It was about the truth. The truth that when you allow someone else to write your story, they will always assign you a supporting role. Darius wasn't a monster. He was simply a man terrified of his own insignificance, who needed my light to project his shadow. And I gave it to him. I handed over my voice, my intelligence, and my fortune, hoping that in return he would give me love. But all I received was a gilded cage. The most painful and liberating lesson is this: no one can make you feel small without your consent. The power others wield over you is, ultimately, a power you have lent them. And the most beautiful thing is that you can always, always reclaim it. True strength doesn't scream. It doesn't need to break things or humiliate others to prove its existence. True strength is an email sent in the stillness of the night. It is a small suitcase packed with deliberation. It is the silence on the other end of the line when someone's world collapses. For years, I confused Darius's aggression with strength and my calm with weakness. How wrong I was. The greatest power we have is the ability to choose our response. He chose rage and noise, and his world imploded. I chose strategy and silence, and I built a new one from the ground up. It's not about who shouts the loudest. It's about who knows the truth and acts on it without the need for applause or witnesses. And freedom? Freedom isn't having a limitless bank account. That's just wealth. True freedom is waking up in the morning in a place that feels like yours, drinking a coffee you brewed yourself, and knowing that every decision of the day, big or small, belongs to you. It's the freedom of not having to measure your words, of not shrinking to fit into someone else's expectations. It is the freedom to simply be you. The greatest luxury I have known was not the apartment in Brickell or the Mercedes in the garage. It has been the peace of sitting on my balcony with no sound but the wind and feeling complete by myself. That is a fortune that cannot be bought and, thankfully, cannot be stolen. If you're in a situation where you feel invisible, where your voice has been silenced and your value is constantly questioned, I want you to know something. I see you. I know that silence can feel like surrender, but it is often the space where the most important revolutions are conceived. You don't have to wait to be broken into pieces to start rebuilding yourself. That strong woman, the one you were before they convinced you that you needed someone else to shine, already exists inside you. Listen to her, trust her. She knows the way back home, the way back to yourself. Your story is not over. Perhaps, like mine, it is just waiting for the right catalyst to truly begin. The story I have told you is not really about a husband cutting up a credit card. It is about a woman who realized that she was the bank, the source, the power itself. It's about understanding that the control others have over us is an illusion we help maintain. My name is Simone, and I had to lose everything he thought he had given me to find the one thing that truly mattered: myself. Justice sometimes doesn't arrive with a thunderclap, but with the silent click of a button that transfers the power back to its rightful owner. And that is a lesson I hope you take with you. Thank you for allowing me to share my story. If anything I've told has resonated with you, if you've ever felt underestimated or had to fight to reclaim your own voice, leave a comment telling me your experience. You are not alone. Let's create a space here where every story is heard and every voice is valued. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because every resilient story we share is a reminder that no matter how broken we feel, we always have the power to rebuild. Trust me, you won't want to miss the next one.